Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
But I'm intrigued by forensics. I'm super intrigued, especially you mentioned DNA, and now there's this waterfall of justice happening with investigative genetic genealogy that I'm so torn about. I love that it's happening, but then I'm also, a Fourth Amendment guy, right? Like, if I didn't let this company know that when I want to figure out what my ancestry is like, that it's also going to be opened up to law enforcement to try and create a profile, like that seems a little bit of an intrusion. But it's a net gain. We're catching bad guys. And I think ultimately it's a really powerful investigative tool. I'd love to know your thoughts on that. Sorry, I know it's your show and I'm interviewing you now, but there's so much I want to know about you. Yeah. Yeah.
It's forensics FIG is what it's called, the Forensics Investigative Genetic Genealogy.
FIGG?
FIGG, yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes it's just IGG.
Yeah.
Genetic genealogy is kind of the next phase of DNA. And when you look at the actual DNA level, it uses a different part than what the typical STR profile, which is what they can use in court. That's the DNA you're going to get when you take like a buccal swab and then they find physical DNA off of the evidence, the murder weapon or the victim's clothing or something like that. So there's a part on the DNA strand called STR, short tandem repeat. And then there's another part of the DNA profile that's called I'm not sure the actual clinical name. It's not clinical, but the scientific name, but they call it a SNP. And the SNP is where you get your genetic genealogy from. And that's where like 23andMe and Ancestry.com.
Right.
Yeah. When they first got into that, where they can tell what your ancestry is and your gender and all that kind of stuff. And so that, those databases, the main ones where it's specifically meant for genealogy, Ancestry, 23andMe, when the Golden State Killer, when they first used the genetic genealogy to capture the Golden State Killer, I don't think those databases and those companies understood kind of what was happening.
Right.
And since then, they've essentially closed those off. So cops can't use those anymore. So
right.
Definitely if you're interested in your genealogy, then go use Ancestry.com.
Yes.
Because those are safe. Now
there are a couple other ones that say, hey, we also allow law enforcement to poke around.
when I think even Ancestry and 23andMe, but well, even if they don't, you can go to others and you can specifically mark a box and say, can this be used to for a database that can be searched by law enforcement? I don't know what the exact verbiage is, but it's something like that. And like GEDmatch, I think, is the big one.
Yeah.
And that one, there's a couple of companies that I'm really familiar with and I work with all the time that use GEDmatch as the database. And it's, I don't know, there's several million people that have voluntarily entered their DNA into GEDmatch. And so, once you get a profile, so the key is if you have DNA from evidence, but you don't have DNA from an actual suspect to compare it to,
right?
You have to have both. And you have to have a reference sample, which is the one where you take like a buccal swab of your mouth.
Yep.
That's what's called a reference sample. And the other one is the DNA from the evidence and from the crime scene. Well, you have to have You have to have both in order to create compare the profiles. Well, if you don't, then you can enter that DNA from the crime scene, which is what they had with the Golden State Killer.
Yeah.
They had the guy's DNA from the many crimes that he committed, but so that's how they knew he was a serial killer and how he had progressed from rapes and all that kind of stuff. But they didn't. They had like 1,000 suspects, which it's impossible to narrow that down to. And so,
absolutely.
But by using the genetics and the genealogy of it, they were able to narrow it down to like six suspects.
Right.
And and
then they can go try and get like surreptitious samples, right? They can like track them, and like he throws out a cup or a cigarette butt or something. And
So ultimately, they want to narrow it down using genetic genealogy. They narrow it down to a family line. Sometimes they can get it like some of these genetics experts, man, they can get it down to the actual person. Amazing. They say, no, this is the guy you're looking for.
I've covered cases because there's another show that I do that is much more just true crime, forensic. Here we go. It's called Criminal Mischief. And my partner on it, she's a journalist from Seattle. And we've covered cases where the lab comes back and says, okay, this is who you're looking for. Mm-hmm. Right. We have the entire profile. It's here. Sometimes they can even give you a sketch of what they might look like.
Yeah.
Based on, and that blows my mind. That's got to be.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It's like a sea change in terms of forensics.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And my opinion, my lay opinion, is that it's going to revolutionize.
It is. It absolutely is. There's
in ways that we don't really understand yet.
Yeah. There's cases being solved all over the country and all over the world, really. And
it's been privatized to a point. And there was one case where, and this was going back maybe 5 or 6 years, where it was a college somewhere back east where they were teaching it, right? They're teaching genetic genealogy in their like criminal justice kind of suite of classes. And, and the investigators were from a small Midwest town that didn't have the money to do it all. And they're like, no. We'll pay for it. We are a well-funded private school. We'll pay for all of the genetic stuff, and we'll just give you like the results. And they're like, yeah, okay. And they solved it. Mm-hmm. And the professor then left and started her own kind of thing. And so I think it's going to be moving to the private sector. Right, that's going to be super well funded, and it's just, and I think you're going to start seeing all of these dominoes start falling with these cases being solved, which is amazing.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of private people that can come in. They can look at the profiles that the police may have obtained, and then there's even algorithms being written, where they can plug the profile in and. It'll connect to the databases and it'll crank it out. But
what do you think about? Let me ask you a question, because I was asked this before. So because in a lot of the cases that I've gone over, and really just as the side person, like Carolyn, my partner, she's the brains of the outfit. But a lot of times the way it works is we don't have DNA of the bad guy. We don't have the reference sample that you're talking about. Okay. But we through the IgG process, we know who the family is. We have, an idea. Because a relative of this guy checked out their ancestry and they're in the database. Okay. So they go to the family and they say, hey, will you give us a sample? And they're honest with it. They're like, we think a blood relative of yours is a serial killer. Will you help us catch them? Right? By giving us a DNA sample to kind of narrow it down. And that's a weird question for me. Like, if law enforcement knocked on my door and they said, someone in your family we think is right for these murders and we need your help. It's family. I don't know if I would help, would you do that? Maybe it's like the Jersey Mafia in me. They're like, hey, keep your mouth shut. Like, but I don't know if I would help get a blood relative brought up on murder charges?
I don't know. It depends on how well you liked them, I guess. No, yeah. You know what though? By the time they get to that level, if they understand um, and this is something that I think everybody really needs to understand is, you know, even a DNA profile is just one cog in the wheel.
Yeah.
You know, you're not going to get convicted just based on a DNA profile.
Right.
There has to be so many other pieces of evidence that's going to tie you to the crime, because your DNA can be there, and believe it or not, DNA can survive for a long time.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if your DNA is at a crime scene, you know, whether it be a storefront or somebody's house, you know, it doesn't really matter. Your DNA there just places you there at some point in time.
Right.
Well, from there, they have to look at, okay, well, where was he the night that the crime was committed? You know, where, what, and I'm assuming it's a he because most of the time it is, but,
Yep.
You know, what does the cell phone data say? What does eyewitnesses say? You know, those are all just pieces of the puzzle that they have to put together. Yeah, you're never going to get convicted based on one specific thing. You know, some evidence is more powerful than others, but it's always going to just be a part of the story. It's not going to be the entire story. So, you know, the risk that you say, and I'm a big Fourth Amendment guy too.
Yeah.
But you know, they can obtain it so many other ways that, to me, it's kind of like, you know, do I really want to be, you know, inhibiting or slowing down this this investigation?
And I think at the end of the day, I'd be like, all right, my cousin's a murderer. He's a murderer, and he deserves what he gets. I'd probably do the right thing, but there would be some pause for me, you know.
Oh yeah, no, I think 99% of people would be like, well, I don't know about that.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, if they're sitting there and they're at your doorstep and they've said, we think like your first cousin is, you know, a murderer, they don't need your DNA, but at that point.
Right. And if you know my first cousin, they're probably right. No.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and but by then they can basically use some of these other pieces of evidence that they have to narrow it down, get a warrant, and then they can just follow the guy and eventually, like you said, get a cigarette butt or something. You know, they'll get a glass, you know, like I've got my little glass here of water, and they can get, you know, anything that even has a fingerprint on it. You can typically scrape enough DNA off of that to develop a good You only need 10 cells.
Jeez.
And if you think about, we typically will slough off 400,000 cells a day between everything that we touch. You know, we shower in the morning. When you're talking, you know, you're putting DNA on everything within a couple of feet just by talking. You know, so your DNA is everywhere, and it's pretty easy to get. I shouldn't say easy. Well, getting DNA, especially with our system, like the MVAC, we can collect DNA, just massive amounts of it. The question though is, can you get good DNA, viable DNA? Because if it's like, you know, you're in a hotel room.
Sure. Oh, exactly. That was going to be my question. Has and I think the answer is yes, but has your device like made it through like courtroom like scrutiny? Like, has it been like accepted as evidence in trials?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's even gone through the
impressive, man.
It's gone through the appellate process. So it's it's our system of collecting DNA has been accepted. I don't know how many of the 50 states, but yeah, it's widely accepted.
Do you have competition out there? Are there other devices like yours? Or
no, not really. There's some that try to fake it, but as far as being an actual commercialized consistent. It's going to work the same way pretty much every time.
So my question about it is, like, what makes it unique? Is it where, once it gets sucked up, is it where it gets captured that makes it like sterile, or that makes it like that protects it from being corrupted, or
Yeah, well, it's a two-step process. So initially, the MVAC is spraying a solution down and vacuuming it up, and it's
okay.
originally collected in a bottle, and then we concentrate it on a filter, so it gets rid of all the liquid, and then just the DNA is on the filter, and that's what the lab actually processes. But everything that would touch DNA or have DNA in it, like the tubing, the stuff like that would have the DNA in it, it's a one-time use. So,
really?
so you're never carrying DNA from like one piece of evidence to the next one, because you're with each new piece of evidence, let alone a new crime scene or something like that,
Sure.
you're getting a new sterile MVAC. So,
wow.
Yeah. I hope
well, there's
that
a
makes
game
sense.
I want to play. I want to play a game if you're up for it. I want to give you a current case, because I'd love to know, like, a quick 2 minutes rapid fire on stuff that's in the news. Okay. Gilgo Beach. Go.
Wait, say that again?
The Gilgo Beach murderer. The alleged, that big mountain of a guy in New York and on Long Island, where who was recently arrested.
Oh, the Long Island serial killer.
The Long Island serial killer.
Okay.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, everything he touched, including wrapping up the women in burlap.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff, you bet. We can.
So you think he's good for it?
Well, if he touched it, and so here's the deal. DNA breaks down with humidity and with heat. Sunlight breaks it down faster. So a lot of it's going to depend on how long the victim was there before they found her. If the victim was out in the elements for a long time, there's a much higher chance that the DNA is not going to be, really be able to isolate it, his DNA versus hers. Now, there are ways of, if you look specifically at the Y chromosome of the suspect, it's called a YSTR profile, then, you can get rid of a lot of the victim DNA and just focused on the suspect. If it's a male on female,
right?
If it's a male on male, then you can't do that, because both of them have Y chromosomes. But if the victim's a female and the suspect's a male, then a lot of times they can use that YSTR, and it isolates. So, especially if the victim is, say it's been a couple of weeks or even months, the victim's DNA, the body's skeletonized even, after, say it's 3 to 6 months, something like that.
Yeah.
Her clothing, she decomposed in her clothing, then it's really hard, but you can focus on a YSTR if you do that. And then it gets rid of all of the victim DNA and focuses only on the male suspect. So lots of different ways that investigators can focus. But as far as the Long Island serial killer, if he physically handled those victims and they got to the victims' bodies before the decomposition got too bad, then absolutely you can collect all sorts of DNA from that.
All right. What about what's going on in Idaho? It's about to go to trial with the Kohlberger case with those 4 students.
Yeah.
I'd love your opinion on that, because there's that, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but there's that additional blood sample, like on the railing, that they're not looking at because they got a DNA sample off like the sheath of a knife. And they
got his DNA from one of the snaps, I think.
Of the
sheath. Yeah.
Yeah.
The one that as far as the MVAC goes,
Yeah.
By the way, my whole family went to University of Idaho.
Oh, oof.
I mean,
Wow.
my dad was there. I lived in Moscow, Idaho for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
When I was younger. Yeah, my dad graduated from University of Idaho, and then where Koberger was going to school at Washington State, that's where my dad got his PhD. So intimately
Very
familiar with that area.
Yeah.
In fact, when this whole thing first happened, I sent the chief of police up there an email saying, "Hey, if you think the MVAC would help this investigation, man, I'll load it up and I'll be up there tomorrow."
Wow.
So, fortunately, I think they were able to capture him, and I think they had their sights set on him so fast that, between cell phone data and things like that,
Yeah.
it they didn't need it, but and I'm pretty sure they used swabbing for that snap. They were able to get enough of his DNA from that snap that because it's snaps, they kind of have sharp edges. So if he ran his thumb across that at any point, it wouldn't be hard to get good DNA from there. And my understanding now is they got his DNA off of one of the victim's fingernails.
Oh, wow. I didn't hear
So
that yet.
that's like a recent development, my understanding. And that so which kudos to her. She fought back. She was probably in the midst of getting murdered, being stabbed, and she fought back. So, it's kind of like Lake and Riley.
Yeah.
They have her her heartbeat on her smartwatch. That she fought that guy for 18 minutes. And if you think about fighting for your life for 18 minutes, that's a long time. So, she,
oh my gosh.
Anyway,
Wow.
she literally was fighting for her life and fighting for her virtue. And, she was not going to let him rape her. So a lot of these victims, they put up a fight to the end, which is absolutely what they should do. Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.